In case you missed it, ANC Secretary General Magashule and his co-accused were back in the Bloemfontein Magistrate's Court this morning. They're facing charges of corruption and fraud. All 16 accused granted bail. The case has now been moved to the High Court and pre-trial hearings expected to commence on the 11th of August. The charges are related to the Free State asbestos project. Well, let's chat now to analyst Sanusha Naidu, who's been watching the goings-on this morning and I suppose the run-up to all of this as well, Sanusha. And just looking at Magashule before he went into court and also when he came out seeming very confident, almost, what we know him to believe is himself being untouchable, looking at the fanatical support that he has had outside court as well today. I mean, what sort of impression, what were your first impressions? That, does he kind of believe this is for him a done deal, that he is going to get away unscathed from all of this?
Good morning, Yuveka. I think he was a very confident Magashule. I mean, listening to his comments pre the court appearance, he said he wants his day in court. He wants to be able to expedite this, and that sends a signal of confidence that he feels that he can actually proven innocent in all of this, that he's not implicated in any kind of wrongdoing. And I think that kind of is demonstrated by the kind of groundswell support we saw outside the court. And just listening to some of the supporters and Tulasi, where I was interviewing them earlier, the kinds of impression one gets from this is essentially that they actually see him as the next president of the ANC, firstly, and that's not long off from now where the elective conference happens next year, but also of the Republic. And I think this is quite an important space because what Magashule has is that he has that grassroots kind of support. He can rouse and basically build and mobilize that support. And I think that's what we saw today outside the court. And I found it very strategic that, at the end, Andile Lungisa saying, oh, he can't come and address the gathering or the crowd because it will be considered to be an illegal gathering. He could face further charges, and they don't want to add to his litany of charges that he has. And more importantly, they're saying that, we appreciate the support. That's very strategic. I think you would have known all of that even before you went into this whole process. And I think it was a message signaling to the detractors in the party, even the ones that are wearing the orange mask as the detractors outside the court as well, saying to them that, I've got support here. In a way, Magashule grew this party membership. And of course, he was out and about last year during by-elections, checking the list, phoning up people, etc., to vote. So I think he's now demonstrated that what he has is that grassroots support. And it's very difficult to dismantle that grassroots support if in the way that he has structured it and the architecture of it. So I think that was a very strategic move because you could use the lockdown measures as a way to say, we don't want him to be further embattled in terms of legal prosecution and legal woes. But I think it was an interesting salvo that was fired in terms of saying, but you don't have this. You don't have this grassroots support. And that, I think, was very, very strategic on their part.
Well, Sanusha, let's just talk the bigger picture here and what the implications of this case might actually be for the ANC going forward and the country as a whole, I support. I mean, let's just look at also, Magashule seems to have the same kind of attitude, the same type of thinking as former President Jacob Zuma, sort of seemingly not bothered by all of this. I'm really not. This is really not... I don't have to answer for this. And Magashule and his confidence today inside court and outside of court as well. And the ANC's treatment of these two members, just what does it say? What is it telling us? And what will be the impact of just what happens, what pans out in both of these cases, not just Magashule?
Yeah. It's a very difficult one because they have a very popularist support base. And they can basically orchestrate the narrative in a way that they want to actually have the narrative play out. They talk about, listening to Andile talk about the fact that South Africa is still a British satellite and that it's been controlled. Listening to some of the supporters on the ground repeating the narrative and the rhetoric that media houses are controlled by white monopoly capital. They creating the tension and the fragmentation and the conflict within the party. That's very, very rebel-rousing language, but it's the narrative that they control. And that narrative that they can control, they can pick it up on the basis of the poverty, inequality, the structural conditions, the mere fact that people's lives are in despair. And if you think about how you can then orchestrate and basically mobilize that narrative to your own political interests, it's very easy to do. It's a populist way of doing that. And so in many ways, both former President Ramaphosa and Ace Magashule come from that kind of radical economic transformation agenda narrative, which they essentially are able to manipulate and orchestrate it in different ways. So it's not that I stole the money and therefore you are poor. It's the fact that we haven't had transformation. And that is the big question in South Africa. So it's almost like they can stand up there and they can sing, they can talk in very, very populist language. Sometimes the language can be very insightful. And they know their supporters will go out and bat for them. Look at what's happening outside in Kanjla with regard to what happened to the police minister yesterday and how the MK Veterans Association and others have basically stopped people from getting into Kanjla to convince the former president to actually go and appear before the Zondo Commission. So I think to a large extent, they have that base. And it's very difficult when you start spinning a narrative, when people believe it, and they start talking about that narrative in the run-up to different things. So I think it's going to be a very, very difficult space in order to break down those pillars of the narrative.
Is there almost also, Sanusha, a bit of sort of almost a disregard for the actual leadership at the moment, especially their relationship with President Cyril Ramaphosa? And I think that might be best demonstrated by Ace Magashule's response earlier when he was asked a question about, his supporters saying he's being politically persecuted and had he brought this up within the ANC? And then his response saying, why should I speak to the president about the case? I mean, considering you are the ANC Secretary General, one would imagine that, you would be at pains to sort of just make things okay, just smooth things over where you are at the moment. But that statement, does it speak volumes?
Well, it speaks volumes in the sense that he feels that he's untouchable in the organization, that the kind of architecture that he has put together in terms of where he is within the organization, he's very powerful. So if he doesn't need to speak to the president, then obviously we know that this position that he has in the party is much more authoritative than the president. It's much more influential than the president. And for him to make that statement so boldly in a public domain demonstrates how confident and powerful he sees himself as an individual, both within the party and outside of the party. So I think that's the one thing. The second thing is that he actually believes, in a way, there's a disconnect. President Ramaphosa, or the faction that sits with the President Ramaphosa faction, they're kind of disconnected from the grassroots in many ways. They are seen as aloof. They're seen as disconnected. They're actually seen as the proponents of white monopoly capital. They've benefited out of it. And of course, now they are basically trying to destabilize the radical economic transformation agenda. They essentially are seen as opponents of it. The third thing is the disunity project. As much as the president speaks about a unity project, it's more of a disunity project. So I think to a large extent, Ace Magashule is so confident, and he oozes confidence in the way that he speaks. He's charismatic to the people. And of course, this is something that a populist leader has. So we've got to watch that space very carefully, because at the end of the day, people are not unpacking what the real root crisis of the situation is in the party, but they're actually now aligning to this populist narrative.
And what is that root crisis? Is it possibly the question of who's actually really in charge?
Yeah, the root crisis of the party is in a complete tailspin. It's completely in a situation of complete disarray, crisis upon crisis. It's actually unraveling before itself. It's in a conflict with itself. It's fighting with itself, and no party in that kind of, or institution, organization in that kind of context can actually rule with any certainty. So I think that's the problem. The problem is when you think about it, it's about the battle of the soul of who controls the party and who owns the party, and that is what's coming out. Now we've got an elective conference next year, but I think you've got a National General Council meeting this year, and this is going to be key for the Ramaphosa faction. We come out of an NEC meeting last week. We read the NEC outcome document and what President Ramaphosa said there about people taking the initiative, stepping aside, doing the right thing. You can see it's not there. It's talk. Nobody's taking it seriously. Yes, you had the Premier in the Eastern Cape firing his MEC for health, but these are sacrificial lambs. In the bigger scheme of things, the broader context of it, it's the bigger political opponents and figures who are not going to be stepping away.
And let's just look at the wider picture to that. You mentioned all these upcoming events, Sanusha. We're also possibly in a local government election year. We're waiting for confirmation of when and how and whether this will actually go ahead as planned. So the ANC itself has to really be seen to get its house in order. But these seem to be very, very difficult figures that they're going to have to deal with in terms of their own image.
At this point in time, Yuveka, Ace Magashule has the competitive edge. He's been out and about. Until we had the third lockdown adjusted regulation measures, Ace Magashule was out and about in the by-elections last year, where he was basically seen as a lobbying activist, moving, mobilizing, talking to people. And you can see that support there. I mean, for me, the challenge is whether or not we continue with this lockdown 3 regulation measures, because it will have an impact for the lobbying, the election manifesto launches for political parties. And we know that they have to have a period of time in which to go out and do their normal electioneering. And unfortunately, if we continue with these lockdown measures, it gives them very limited time. This can go either way for President Ramaphosa in the ANC. It could be a boon for him, where today we saw that strategic move by the Ace Magashule faction, who said, you know what, it's an illegal gathering. We can't afford him to become more embroiled in legal battles. But at the same time, it actually could play in Ace Magashule's interest, where he can actually start doing these kinds of things in terms of mobilizing people, in terms of how you communicate. So it's such a finely balanced, fragile situation right now for the party in terms of the party list. And the last point to make here is that they also, at the NEC meeting, resolved and decided that they want to do a kind of vetting of candidates for the candidate list for the local government elections. That's going to be another bun fight. So I think there's going to be a lot of tension around who makes the list, how they get onto the list, and which factions are predominantly represented in the list at the local government level.
Okay, Sanusha Naidu, thank you so much. Just breaking it down, what we saw, what we heard outside court, Ace Magashule, his supporters, and what it actually means for the ANC in the bigger picture.